Okay, so isn't it kind of crazy how much we're bombarded with all this time management stuff these days?
Yeah.
Everywhere you look, there's a new book, a new app, a new guru promising to, totally transform your life.
Right.
But let's be honest, a lot of it is, well, kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, it can be.
Either it's super vague, be more mindful, work smarter, not harder, or it's
Hmm.
wake up at 4 a.m., run a marathon, and then write a novel before breakfast.
Yeah, there's definitely a spectrum.
But you, our amazing listener, you're clearly ready to take things to the next level, right? I mean, just look at the awesome material you've sent our way for this deep dive. We're talking classic techniques, surprising examples from super achievers. I mean, it's all here.
What I find really interesting about the sources you've chosen is that they all emphasize this key idea.
Hmm.
Time management isn't actually about, you know, cramming more into your already packed schedule. It's really about aligning your time with what truly matters most to you.
I love that. So it's not about speed, it's about intentionality, right?
Absolutely.
And speaking of intentionality, let's dive into some of those classic time management methods you've shared with us. We've got the Pomodoro technique, the Eisenhower matrix, time blocking, getting things done. Whoa, that's quite a lineup.
It is, and they all offer a different perspective on how to structure your time effectively.
Okay, so let's break it down. First up, the Pomodoro technique. Now, I'll admit the name always makes me think of Italian food or something.
Well, it is named after a tomato-shaped timer.
Ah, that makes sense.
But the technique itself is all about breaking your work into these focused intervals, typically 25 minutes long,
Hmm.
separated by short breaks. And you might be thinking, timers, really? But there's actually a lot of power in that.
Yeah, because I'm the kind of person who gets totally sucked into what I'm doing and then suddenly 3 hours have passed.
Exactly. Our brains aren't really wired for sustained attention on one task for hours on end.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better about my intense focus sessions.
And that's where the Pomodoro technique comes in. By working with our natural attention spans, these intervals actually help you to be more productive and prevent burnout.
So it's like tricking your brain into focusing.
In a way, yes. You're leveraging the power of short bursts of concentrated effort.
I like it. Okay, so what about the Eisenhower matrix? That one sounds kind of intense.
It can sound that way, but it's actually a really helpful tool for prioritizing tasks.
Okay, I'm listening.
Basically, you divide your tasks into 4 quadrants based on their urgency and importance.
Oh, right, urgent and important, urgent but not important, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And by categorizing your tasks this way, you can quickly identify what needs your immediate attention and what can be scheduled, delegated, or even eliminated altogether.
So it's about being really strategic about where you're spending your energy, right?
Exactly. It's about making sure that you're not just constantly reacting to the most urgent things, but also making time for the important things that contribute to your long-term goals.
Okay, I can see how that would be super helpful. Now, time blocking, that one sounds pretty self-explanatory.
It is, but don't underestimate its power. It's basically like creating a visual schedule for your day, where you allocate specific blocks of time for different tasks and activities.
Okay, so if I'm okay, from 10 Binero to 11 Boidero, I'm going to work on that presentation, that's time blocking.
Exactly. And the beauty of it is that it forces you to be more intentional with your time.
Hmm.
Instead of just letting the day happen to you, you're proactively designing it to align with your priorities.
So it's like giving your day a structure, like a framework.
Precisely. And having that structure can make a huge difference in your productivity and your peace of mind.
I can see that. Now, last but not least, we have getting things done, or GTD.
Ah, yes. The holy grail of productivity systems for some.
I've heard about it, but I'll admit it always seemed a bit intimidating. What if I'm not ready to have all my things done?
Well, it's not about having everything done at once. That's impossible for most of us. It's more about having a system in place to manage all the information, tasks, and ideas that are constantly swirling around in our heads.
Oh, okay, that makes more sense because, yeah, sometimes my brain feels like it's about to explode with all the things I need to remember.
Exactly. And that's what GTD addresses.
Yeah.
It's based on the idea that our brains are much better at processing information than they are at storing it.
That is so true. I can remember random trivia from years ago, but ask me what I had for breakfast this morning and I'd be clueless.
Right. So GTD encourages you to capture everything, tasks, ideas, projects, even those random thoughts that pop into your head in an external system.
So like a notebook, a to-do list app.
Exactly.
Mm.
Anything that gets those thoughts out of your head and into a trusted system. And the beauty of this is that it frees up mental bandwidth to focus on the task at hand without constantly worrying about forgetting something important.
Okay, so we've talked about all these cool techniques, but, just knowing them doesn't magically make you a time management master, right?
Right, it's like having a toolbox full of shiny tools. You need to know how to use them.
Exactly. So let's, get practical here. What are some real-world strategies we can take away from all of this? What can we actually start doing differently, today?
Well, one of the most important things, and it comes up again and again in these sources, is the importance of setting smart goals.
Smart goals. Yeah, yeah. I've heard that before. But what does that actually mean? Like, what makes a goal smart?
So it's not just a fancy acronym, it's an actual framework for turning vague ideas into concrete actions.
Okay, so less like, I want to be more organized and more like,
More like, I'm going to create a system for managing my digital files by next Friday. See the difference?
yeah, I get it. It's like way more specific and measurable.
Exactly. Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. That's what SMART stands for.
Okay, that's actually pretty easy to remember.
Yeah. Right. And when you have that level of clarity, it's amazing how much more motivated you are to actually take action.
Yeah, because it's not just this vague idea floating around in your head anymore.
Exactly. But even with a SMART goal, you still need a plan to get there. That's where daily prioritization comes in.
So breaking down those big goals into smaller, more manageable steps, right?
Precisely. Even just taking a few minutes each morning to identify your top 3 priorities for the day can make a huge difference.
Oh, I like that. Top 3, that's manageable.
Right. By consciously deciding what deserves your attention, you're less likely to get caught up in those urgent but not important tasks that tend to pop up.
Okay, speaking of things that pop up, can we talk about distractions? Because, oh my gosh, that's my biggest struggle.
Distractions, yes.
Yeah.
The nemesis of productivity.
Seriously, my phone is surgically attached to my hand.
Huh.
And the internet. Don't even get me started.
Well, a lot of the sources you shared actually talk about the importance of creating boundaries around technology.
Yeah, I know. I need to be better about that.
It's tough. But even small changes can make a difference, like designating certain times a day as device-free time, or trying one of those apps that, blocks distracting websites.
Yeah, I've tried those before. I always end up figuring out how to disable them.
Well, don't be afraid to experiment.
Hmm.
Maybe start with shorter periods of focused work, gradually increasing the time as you get more comfortable. It's about finding what works for you.
True. It's gotta find those strategies that actually, work in the real world.
Exactly.
Another thing I struggle with is saying no. It's
Mhm.
so hard, especially when it's to someone you care about or, an opportunity that sounds amazing, but.
It's definitely a skill that takes practice.
Hmm.
A lot of us are conditioned to say yes to everything, even when it's not in our best interest.
Right. We don't want to disappoint anyone, but then we end up overcommitted and stressed out.
Exactly. And the thing is, every time you say yes to one thing, you're essentially saying no to something else.
Whoa. I never thought about it like that.
It's about prioritizing what truly matters most to you, whether it's spending time with family, pursuing a hobby, or simply having some downtime to recharge.
Yeah, I definitely need to get better at protecting my time and energy.
It's not selfish, it's essential.
Okay, now I'm curious about those examples of successful people you mentioned. Like the Elon Musks and the Oprah Winfreys of the world. How do they manage their time?
Well, it's interesting because when you look at how these high achievers structure their days, you start to see that they often rely on the same fundamental principles we've been discussing.
Really? So they're not all just robots working 24/7.
Well, some of them might have pretty intense schedules. Take Elon Musk, for example.
Yeah, yeah, he's known for being a workaholic,
Right.
right?
He's notorious for breaking his day down into 5-minute blocks.
5 minutes. Seriously, I can't even choose an outfit in 5 minutes.
It sounds extreme, and I'm not suggesting we all need to adopt such a rigid approach. But the key takeaway is the principle behind it, being intentional with every moment.
So it's less about the actual time blocks and more about the mindset of making every minute count.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that time is our most valuable resource.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about someone like Warren Buffett? He's the king of investing. I'm curious how he thinks about time.
Well, Buffett is a big believer in the 80-20 rule, also known as the Pareto principle.
The 80-20 rule. Remind me what that is again.
It's the idea that roughly 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts.
Oh, right, right. So focusing on those high impact activities.
Exactly. And Buffett applies this to his time management by ruthlessly prioritizing his top 5 priorities each day.
Top five, so he basically just ignores everything else.
He delegates or eliminates anything that doesn't fall into those top 5.
Wow, that's like next level focus.
It is. But it shows the power of identifying those high-impact activities and giving them your undivided attention.
Okay, I can see how that would lead to some serious results. Now, you also mentioned J.K. Rowling, and like she's a writer, right? So I'm imagining her schedule is probably a bit more flexible, maybe even a little chaotic.
Well, while creative work does require a certain degree of freedom, even writers benefit from structure.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. And Rowling is a big believer in deadlines,
Deadlines, even for herself.
especially for herself.
Hmm?
She says it helps to create a sense of accountability and momentum, especially when you're working on a large, complex project.
So it's like that external pressure, even if it's self-imposed, can be really motivating.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between structure and flexibility, even in creative endeavors.
Okay, this is all super inspiring and everything, but like, let's be real. Life isn't always, perfectly planned 5-minute blocks and color-coded to-do lists.
Right.
Sometimes you just hit a wall. You procrastinate, you get overwhelmed, you lose motivation. So what happens then? What do we do when those like inevitable time management challenges rear their ugly heads?
Well, first of all, it's important to acknowledge that, time management isn't about achieving this state of perfect, effortless productivity.
Yeah.
It's really more about developing strategies for navigating the messiness of real life.
Okay, so how do we deal with that messiness? Let's start with like the big one, procrastination. We've all been there, right?
Wow, absolutely.
That deadline looming, that task we've been putting off for like way too long. It's like this dark cloud hanging over your head. So how do we break free from procrastination's clutches? Any secret weapons in those sources you've got?
Well, one of the most effective strategies, and it comes up repeatedly in the material you shared, is the power of breaking down large, overwhelming tasks into
Mhm.
smaller, more manageable steps.
Yeah, smaller bites, right?
Exactly. Remember the Pomodoro technique we talked about earlier?
The tomato timer thing.
That's the one.
Mm.
It can be incredibly helpful for overcoming procrastination. Even setting a timer for just 25 minutes of focused work can make a daunting task seem much more approachable.
It's like tricking your brain into thinking, oh, this isn't so bad. It's just 25 minutes.
Exactly. And often once you get started, you'll find that you actually want to keep going.
Yeah, sometimes the hardest part is just like starting.
Absolutely. And, sometimes procrastination stems from this fear of failure, this idea that we have to do everything perfectly.
Okay, yeah, I can relate to that.
But that's where the concept of good enough comes in.
Good enough.
Yeah.
So, like, not aiming for perfection.
Exactly. It's about giving ourselves permission to let go of the need for everything to be flawless, especially when we're up against a deadline.
That's a tough one, but I see what you're saying. Sometimes good enough is, well, good enough.
Exactly. Progress over perfection.
I like that. Gotta remember that one. Okay, but what about those days when even the smallest tasks feel impossible? Like
Yep.
your motivation has totally flown the coop. How do we get back on track when we're just feeling like, ah?
Well, one of the simplest yet most powerful things you can do is to reconnect with your why.
My why?
Yes. Why did you set these goals in the first place? What are you hoping to achieve? Taking a few moments to visualize your desired outcome, to remind yourself of the bigger picture, can reignite that spark of motivation.
Oh, I get it. It's like remembering the reason behind all the to-do lists in the early mornings.
Precisely. And remember, it's okay to have those days when you're not operating at peak efficiency.
Really?
Absolutely. Time management isn't about being on all the time. It's about developing sustainable practices that support your well-being and productivity in the long run.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better. This deep dive has been amazing. We've covered so much ground from classic techniques to like real-world strategies and even some ninja tips for overcoming those inevitable time management challenges.
It has been a fascinating journey exploring these ideas with you. And remember, effective time management is just that,
Not journey.
not a destination.
Exactly.
It's about experimenting, finding what works best for you, and, being kind to yourself along the way.
I love that. So to our listeners, as you continue on your own time management adventures, think about what resonated with you today. What's one small change you can make, one technique you can try, one principle you can embrace to make your time work for you. Pick one thing and just see what happens. You might be surprised at the difference it makes.